Welcome, everybody, to the initial episode of the Vitamin D and Me podcast on behalf of the CRN Foundation. The Council for Responsible Nutrition Foundation has put together an educational platform around the science of vitamin D as it relates to various ailments, including aspects of immune health, immune function, and COVID. And we're delighted today to be joined by one of my Nutrisource colleagues, Dr. Susan Hewlings, also a registered dietitian, who's been the lead scientist in terms of generating content and compiling content for this educational platform and initiative. So, Sue, great to have you join us and spend some time with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Will. And I'm real excited about this project and really excited to bring it to everybody and to talk about what we have as a team have provided. And I want to start off by saying this website, so excited about it. It has been such a team effort. And we've worked very closely with CRN and with the website development team, and we put together a great informational piece for people.
So to that end, Sue, from your perspective, what is it that excites you about the sort of the mandate of the project or the initiative in general?
Well, what excites me about it, I mean, anything to do with nutrition is exciting for starters. But the in-depth coverage of a connection between something that I think everybody can relate to as far as health is concerned. This last year and a half, more than any, people have become extremely aware and cognizant of just how critical their immune health is. And this draws the connection of nutrition and health in a way that I don't think anything has before. And what I mean by saying that is, everybody talks about, okay, well, nutrition and heart disease and nutrition and cancer, but those seem sort of not close to you unless you've been diagnosed with those things. And it seems like, well, that's a long time coming. In epidemiology, we call it's a long latency period from the time of exposure or diet till the disease onset. Here, we're talking about something that's very immediate and very tangible for the everyday person. And so what I'm hoping for is that we grab the interest of people and engage them about their diet and their lifestyle through this project.
And when you mention epidemiology, unpack that a bit for us further. What does that mean? Because for the general public, that's a phrase they hear. We hear about epidemiology, epidemiologists as a field of science and health. What does that actually mean?
Well, that's a great question, because I think the word epidemiology is also something that's been brought like a household word where it never was before, because of COVID and the pandemic and some of the news coverage surrounding it. And epidemiology, in a short definition, is looking at the connection of risk and disease. So if we look at people and we compare, like, who has a disease and who doesn't, what's different about those people? Is it where they live? Is it gender? Is it socioeconomic status? Is it diet, lifestyle, genetics? So all sorts of things. And we can look at it in so many different ways. So it's public health in a lot of ways. But specifically, there's a sub-discipline called nutritional epidemiology. And nutritional epidemiology, we look at the connections between diet and disease, and sometimes lifestyle, but specifically diet or nutrients and disease states is the field of nutritional epidemiology. And I think vitamin D and the connection of vitamin D and health in general probably could be considered relevant to both just epidemiology in general, as well as nutritional epidemiology. And nutritional epidemiology, in looking at the connections between diet and disease, really is the foundation of all the things we always talk about as far as general recommendations, like when we put out recommendations to say, eat less of this, more of that, etc. Or also when we look at dietary supplements, we look at individual nutrients. A lot of that research starts in epidemiology. So when we talk about it relevant to, I'll give the example, seems appropriate, of COVID-19. We look at people and we say, okay, what's different about people who get COVID-19 and people who don't? What's different about people who, we look at all people who have it, what's different about those who have positive outcomes, those who have not so great outcomes, those who have to go to the ICU, those who don't? And we can look all across and see what's different about all of those things and try to come up with associations. And there's several reasons we do that. And it's not always about treatment. It's about what can we do to give people the best chance possible at optimal health. And we know that the healthier someone is in general, the better off they're going to be, the more resistant to disease, the more quality of life that they have, etc. So we look at those comparisons and those associations for those reasons. And then we can make recommendations. And we can say, okay, you have to be healthy in general. That sort of seems a given. That puts you at advantage in and of itself. But then what can we tweak and what can we fine tune and what can we say we need to look at to try to encourage people to increase, let's say, vitamin D or vitamin C or et cetera. So that's a little bit about nutritional epidemiology, but it has great importance in what we know about nutrition. And I'd also like to say that the thing to understand is that it's relatively new. It's a relatively new field in the science. I was going
to ask, when did all this get started?
Yeah,
what is the bedrock foundational emphasis? Where does this come from?
Yeah, and I mean, I say relatively new. I mean relatively new to like other sciences, like chemistry and biology that have been being studied for centuries. Nutritional epidemiology really started emerging in the second half of the 20th century, and we started really looking at it in terms of deficiencies, because we started noticing that nutritional deficiencies kind of led to certain things like rickets, and of course, scurvy was a little earlier than that. That was easily recognized. And that's what it emerged from. And then in the 70s, they started doing large-scale studies, large-scale longitudinal studies. A lot of you may be familiar with the Nurses' Health Study that they started conducting, where they took thousands of nurses and collected data at certain time points. Every so many months or years, they collect big data, huge data sets of people. And they started looking, okay, so the people that have these conditions, this is what they have in common, this is what they don't have in common. We'll compare, contrast, who gets breast cancer, who doesn't, what can we say is different? And we just follow them, free living. We're not manipulating anything, there's no intervention. And so
it's still ongoing today, is it not?
It's still ongoing today. And that started, I believe, I don't know the exact date, but in the 70s. And Dr. Walter Willett from Harvard got involved, I believe, in the late 70s, early 80s, and really started fast tracking the field of nutritional epidemiology. And what his team started doing, in addition to following these huge longitudinal studies, they started developing and improving the methods by which we collected the data. And that's important. Because again, people are free living and we're trying to get a glimpse. What are they eating? And so we have to rely on them to tell us. So, if you sit back and think, and I could tell you what I ate for the last 3 days, but a lot of our colleagues maybe couldn't. And how accurate is it when people do it? When they tell you, oh yeah, I didn't eat much yesterday. And then they forget, oh yeah, well, there was that lunch and, I just had a little pasta. Oh yeah, but you forgot about that Alfredo sauce. So it's coming up with the tools to get the data that has been a huge advancement in the field. And then once we have the data, how we analyze it has really improved too. So the statistical analyses and the techniques that are way beyond my ability to explain have also advanced as a result of the field. And the reason I go into this, because I think it's important for people to understand, is those are the reasons that we see changes in nutritional recommendations. And why?
Uh-huh.
Like, why didn't we
Very
know about?
interesting.
Yeah, why didn't we know about vitamin D before? Like everybody, like, why are we talking about it now? And people get kind of like, wait, I thought the big deal was zinc. Why are we doing that? You know, and there's several reasons for that, but one of the ones that we should understand is that nutrition is a quickly evolving, quickly developing field. And one of the reasons why is because of the advancements and the evolution of nutritional epidemiology. And the way in which we look at the diet and disease connections is also a reflection of some of those changes. Like, why were we telling everybody not to eat fat in the 80s, and now we're saying eat fat, and now nobody's trying to make it up or lie to anybody. We're just trying to give the best information that we have available to us, the reflection of the best science that we have today.
I think that's a great point, because I think one of the things when we talk about making information available in a way so that the general public can interpret the information, it's translatable and understandable. One of the knocks against nutrition is, well, I read this headline in eggs are good for me. I read this headline in eggs are bad for me. Then it's egg white versus the yolk, and then it's raw egg versus egg prepared in this manner. But it is an ongoing developing story.
It is. And of course, what you speak of has another angle to it too, and that's where is that headline you're reading? Who wrote it? You know, what was their background? You know, that's something to consider too, because the thing that I love and hate about my field is that everybody eats, and therefore everybody's an expert. Everybody knows better. Oh, what do you think? Yeah, but I heard that so and so. Well, yes, you know, that's great, but where did you hear it? Who was the person? So it's understanding what it means to have a reputable source is also very important. But
Absolutely.
One of the reasons, tying it back around to vitamin D and me, one of the reasons we're talking about vitamin D is because of nutritional epidemiology and some of the connections we've seen with vitamin D and health and how they're quickly emerging. And one of the discoveries that was, so we see an association. So like the flow of science is also important. We see an association in nutritional epidemiology, and now we say, okay, further research is needed, because now we have to look at what is the association and why. So we have to start looking at from the cellular level, doing bench science, different types of scientific studies. Before we even get to the randomized clinical trials, we have to start seeing what could it be. So we've also discovered vitamin D receptors throughout our bodies in different sites to realize that, hey, this vitamin D, it really is important. It's actually interacting throughout our physiology. And so again, it helps to support, okay, why is the connection? What is it? What's going on here? And so that's another step that we've to try to determine the importance of vitamin D.
And as we developed and contributed to the Vitamin D and Me platform, how did you take all of that information that sometimes is contradictory or seems contradictory? How do you look at the sources to put it together in a way that makes it translatable to the general public? Because that in itself is a talent and a skill, and not everybody has that. So how do you go about doing that?
Well, we had several angles. And so the Vitamin D and Me site has several aspects to it. So what we tried to present was completely unbiased information. So you will see some information and studies that are highlighted that did not see an association, completely unbiased. And we have several sections. And we have an educational section that just talks about what vitamin D is, where it comes from, you know, just a basic educational information. And then we summarize studies on vitamin D and COVID-19. So we were very specific in this site. And we conducted the review of the peer-reviewed scientific literature. We conducted it like you would a systematic review, which is a certain way of doing a review. So we conducted our search very systematically. And we said we're going to go to PubMed.gov, which is what we use to one of the search engines we use to look at scientific peer-reviewed literature. And we conducted a search very strategically looking at COVID-19 and vitamin D and several sort of subwords in that search. We wanted the search to be very recent, but we were pretty sure because of our topic it was going to be. And so we limited it to those things. And we came up with originally 73 studies. And we took those studies and we tried to summarize them without losing any of the meaning to make them understandable to the general public. But for anybody who wants to read the abstract, which is the scientific summary that every article has, we link you to pubmed.gov to read that, because we realize some people are going to want to see that for themselves. So we connect you to the research without any sort of opinion. It's completely unbiased. Then we also have an in the news aspect of the site, where basically we just say, okay, here's where vitamin D is being talked about in all aspects of media. It's not the same as peer-reviewed literature, potentially, but sometimes it is. And it's interesting, this is vitamin D being talked about maybe on, different news sites or newspapers or blogs or podcasts, that sort of thing. So that's the main aspects of our site. And we that's how we conducted it.
Super. And then in terms of the information staying current, is there an ongoing updating process?
Yes. And on the site, you can register for updates. We will be updating the site regularly. I think it's pretty safe to assume we're going to have lots of studies that will be published relevant to the topic over the next year or so. And so we'll be updating those regularly, as well as the in the news sites. In addition, we have a great aspect of our site, the podcast, not to be left out. And we have several experts that'll be being interviewed by you, both practitioners and researchers. And will be speaking about vitamin D and the work that they do, and just sort of their opinions about it. So that's another exciting aspect of the site, and that'll be being updated regularly, and will be a great way to engage with the material, to have a live person speaking about it, or record it.
Wonderful.
I guess.
Yeah, and I like the unbiased, balanced approach too. We're not necessarily saying it's always the absolute perfect solution one way or the other. It's just, this is what's being done. This is the activity. It's kind of a report on the activity in the ingredient category of vitamin D and the research related to immune health, immune function, and COVID. And we're letting it in a translatable way for the general public. And I think that's what's so important. Now, earlier you mentioned that nutritional epidemiology is sort of the ongoing elongated pathway of diet and food intake as it relates to disease, and that happens oftentimes over decades in a person's life. But you also mentioned that in this particular instance, there's a little bit more instant gratification. So do you want to explain that a little bit further? Because I think a lot of consumers, particularly during COVID, are always interested in a little more instant gratification if it exists.
Well, instant gratification, sort of, because the thing is if you don't get sick, it doesn't seem as instant, right? Because you didn't get sick. And you don't know, well, would I have gotten sick had I not done this? Like, it's a harder thing to see. And I think that you bring up an interesting point in that regard too, right? Because that's always going to make being healthy a little less tangible and immediate feeling. And I think people, but it brings up a great point about dietary supplements and nutrition in general, is unfortunately people go to them with that in mind, like almost like you would when you're seeking an aspirin or something like that. And it's not like that. And it doesn't work that way. And it's not intended to work that way. It can't work that way legally. But the idea is that your best defense against, anything, and that doesn't even mean a disease state, your best defense against feeling like crap and being exhausted is to be healthy. And you can't do it instantaneously. You can't have every day, you're smoking and drinking, and then, okay, well, tomorrow I'm going to eat a salad and it's all going to be okay. And that is the tough part of it, though, because we are immediate just in our human sort of way of dealing with the world. We're immediate in nature. So yeah, but that being said, whether or not you get heart disease is a little more long as far as its latency period than whether or not you get, COVID-19 or other immune-related conditions. So that's kind of what I meant. But I do want to say this. The other thing about nutritional epidemiology is that it should be appreciated how difficult it is we have something in the field, and the studies that I interpreted as best I could for the general consumer will see the word confounding a lot. Be like, what is that? What's a weird word? What does that mean? Well, confounding is looking at all the things that could also be affecting what you're studying. So we see a relationship between vitamin D and immunity. But what else that's going on with that person and that could be somewhat related to vitamin D could also then be affecting their immunity. So maybe they have low vitamin D because they live in long-term residential care, so they don't get out in the sun very often. Or they live in Canada in the winter and they have to walk around wearing flannel shirts, and so they don't get exposed to the sun very often. So what else could be related that could be affecting vitamin D and affecting immunity? And that can be a lot of different things. It can be age, it can be gender, it can be, where you live, your other aspects of your health, other medications that you're taking. And so it's very hard to control for all that. And in addition, if we look at nutrients and we say, well, if you're not consuming enough of this nutrient, usually you're not consuming enough of a bunch of other stuff too. It's usually not isolated. So the example in this case would be, okay, if you are overweight, you don't exercise much, eat a lot of fast food and junk food, maybe you smoke, taking a vitamin D supplement isn't going to, all of a sudden, you're going to be completely protected and it boosts your immunity. In other words, having adequate vitamin D levels is part of a healthy lifestyle in general and all the way around. And so I think that's one thing we want to make sure on vitamin D and me, that while in this instance we are highlighting one nutrient, we want to make sure that that's just one nutrient among a bunch of others and as part of a healthy lifestyle in general. And I think that's the important thing. And it goes back to the nutritional epidemiology, because it does make it challenging to try to pull one thing out and say, hey, this is happening to these people because of this one nutrient. It's, it's challenging.
Yeah, and it's really an integrated approach to wellness. It's so multifactorial, many variables at play, but this seems to be an important variable amongst the group of variables that could impact wellness, general overall feeling of health, or feeling healthy. So it's just as we wrap up here, this is a great introduction to this whole series. Fantastic. Thanks again for spending your time today. I wanted to focus on how people can help themselves in this manner. We talk about diet, we talk about exercise, but it's a two-way street. So like you say, you can't just add vitamin D or any one specific nutrient to a super unhealthy lifestyle and expect some sort of miraculous turnaround or miraculous results, right? So if you could talk a little bit further about some really sort of basic tools that people can use in a general way to really empower themselves and enable themselves to assist in taking control of their wellness.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing I do want to point out before I get into that is one thing that makes vitamin D unique, because it is unique among, I don't want to like lump it in with everything else, because what makes vitamin D unique is that it is not abundant in the food supply. And so unlike some other nutrients where eating a balanced, healthy diet really will provide plenty, and that's not the case for vitamin D, because that's what another reason, we started off the conversation talking about what excites me about this. Well, vitamin D is unique in that regard because we can make vitamin D from the sun, and that's how we were designed to acquire it. It's like evolutionarily speaking, we were designed to be in the sun. We were. And I know that we've kind of come to this point where it's like, well, don't tell people to go in the sun because we don't want people to get skin cancer. So you're like, no, like a little bit of sun is healthy for you, but do you want to tell people that as a practitioner becomes sort of like a conundrum. And you think, well, how could we need this thing? How could it be so important for our physiology, but not abundant in the food supply? And again, it's a sign of our times and our indoor lifestyles and the fact that we were designed to live in the sun. And yet the sun, you say, well, okay, well, why didn't people, way back get skin cancer and it be life-threatening? Well, probably for several reasons. They probably didn't live long enough for it to be an issue in many, depending on how far back we go. And I think that the atmosphere, the ozone layer, our environment was such that the rays weren't as damaging. They weren't the same. And so we have changed our surroundings living inside, and we've also changed our environment in what we've done to it too, which also impacts all this. And so to me, one of the things that has always interested me in nutrition is how it connects us to everything. It connects us to each other, it connects us to culture, and it connects us to nature and the environment, because that's where it comes from. And that's a great segue to answer your question, which is, what can you do? And I never feel like I have enough time to sit down with people and really say what they can do. But a basic guideline is to go back to basics, to eat as whole and natural as you possibly can, because that's what we were designed to do. So to limit processed food as much as you can. And you're not going to hear me talk in absolutes as far as never eat this, always eat this. I don't do that. That would be remiss. But I think anytime that you can get whole, natural food, vegetables, fruits, whole grains into your diet, lean meats, those are things that you want to try to include. And I think when we try to recommend in general for people, we usually gravitate towards a Mediterranean-based diet because it incorporates very natural, healthy things. It incorporates healthy fats, lean meats. But a rule of thumb is just, if it has a huge list of ingredients that you can't pronounce, move on. As simple and as basic as you can get is where it's at. Is really a general rule of thumb, and you almost can't go wrong with that. And yes, people live in areas where they may not have access to locally grown vegetables and fruits. The next best thing would be frozen, to help supplement when things are seasonal and you can't get them. It's a great if you can grow your own garden and stuff, but I mean, like, I can't do that because
not always practical.
It takes time. I have salt water right here, and I've killed every plant I've ever owned. So there's that. But I think within reason is why I say that. With what works within your life and your lifestyle, go back to basics. It just makes sense.
Yeah. And then in terms of the exercise component of that, is it also sort of a basic approach of just get out there, just get active, just get moving ultimately?
Yeah. I mean, finding what works for you is, I was thinking about this the other day. I think I tend to be a glass half full person, and we've been through, as a globally speaking, we've been through so much over the last year and a half. And I think what positives could possibly be gleaned by something like this. And I thought to myself, the one thing I can say is that it has really brought to the general home, the general person, in-home exercise stuff has just taken off. And the options that you have for that. I mean, it used to be like, it was just to do in-home exercise was so boring. And I mean, now we have, like, you can work out with people from all over the world on a giant mirror. You can bike with people, I mean, and then there's just all kinds of apps and everything in between. And if you can virtually compete with people, even if you do go out and walk and run by yourself, you can come in and log into a site. So the options that you have to find healthy exercise that works for you with barely leaving your home, I think is one of the few positives we can glean from all of this. And so take advantage of that.
Good point.
Yeah, find what for you out there. Talk to people, get on social media, see what other people are doing. I mean, probably your friends are already posting it anyway, but I mean, get on there and find out and say, okay, I'll, hey, you got one of those mirrors? Can I come over and try it? Like, it's, what it's all about. So yeah, I mean, don't go out and spend thousands until you know, but there's a lot of options out there.
Absolutely.
And you can always just get out and walk and get a little vitamin D. But now maybe I've just told you to go out in the sun and I shouldn't have.
Well, we'll deal with the contradictory nature of science on another episode sometime. In the interim, though, I just want to say, as we wrap up, thank you so much, Dr. Hewlings, for all the insights today, and thank you for all your work on the Council Responsible for Nutrition Foundation Vitamin D and Me platform. I think it's going to be an incredible tool for the general public to get fair, unbiased, balanced information so they can make informed decisions for themselves and their family. And that in itself is a very important public service. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be involved with the site.